speaking first for the affirmative. If you were on a digital ballot, there would be a place to put that information in. And Jackson will be speaking second for the negative.
And what's your name?
I'm Jane Gray.
Jane, okay.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Perfect. Caroline and I affirm resolve. The European Union should join the Belt and Road Initiative. Unfortunately, Garcia Herrero of George Washington University finds that while the Belt and Road Initiative had been generally positive from its early stages, a closer look shows a clear worsening. And the most evident reason is relying solely on China's own resources and materials. And Pei elaborates in 2019. With the country feeling an economic slowdown, Beijing's funding for the BRI will decline measurably this year and in the coming years. Consequently, because of the funding squeeze, the World Bank finds in 2017 that sub-Saharan Africa experienced a slowdown in investment growth of 92.5%, which is why our sole contention is African infrastructure. The EU joining the Belt and Road Initiative is key to revitalizing investment in Africa for two reasons. The first is backing domestic investors. As Sandre outlines, the European companies are eager to build ties with Africa, as the largest African markets are expected to be responsible for 82% of consumption growth in the next decade. However, Sierton of the European Institute of Romania writes that without having a solid legal framework providing reliable rules, state aid, and dispute settlement, the Belt and Road Initiative would be useless for European-based companies that are constrained by their domestic rules of business. Thus, while European companies show strong willingness to participate in the BRI, it is up to European governments to support this trend. Second is unifying EU investment. As Sierton continues, individual EU-based institutions are already the largest public lenders in the region. However, the European Innovation Partnership for International Peace writes that alone are not sufficient to deliver the transition from small-scale pilots to mainstream application. They further that only if the EU engages together with the Belt and Road, interests, goals, and visions on connectivity can truly converge. Thus, the BRI provides the necessary framework for European companies to make large-scale and effective investments as a unified body. For these two reasons, affirming increases financing and enables infrastructure to be expanded two ways. The first is building roads. As Satana, the International Journal of Applied Econometrics finds that households living in rural communes with roads have a 67% higher probability of escaping poverty than those without roads. And the strongest positive impact was for the poorest households. As the World Bank quantifies in 2019 that if implemented fully, the initiative could lift 32 million people out of poverty. Further, Yellen from the University of California implicates that the explorer experienced a more than twofold higher risk of mortality. The second is reducing biomass. As Salgar 13 finds, in developing countries, about 2 billion people continue to rely on traditional biomass. Energy consumption in developing countries where biomass is 90% of the total. These countries are functionally locked into biomass as they have burnt it for centuries. Crucially, China funds African energy into coal. As Puwanga 2019 explains, China's contribution to the energy sector in Africa has the bulk of investment flowing into fossil fuels, accounting for 60% of the total energy budget. Indeed, coal provides a way out. As the AFRA in 2011 finds, when comparing coal to traditional biomass, the African population finds it easier to purchase and easier to use. That's critical, as the PFPI in 2011 finds that biomass emits 150% the carbon dioxide of coal. And because it has more emissions, Lavelle 13 finds that about 3.5 million people die each year from respiratory illness due to harmful indoor air pollution from wood and biomass cook stoves. Thus, to break the cycle of poverty within Africa and save millions, please affirm.
What's your name?
I'm
No.
I'm Jackson Perkins.
Jackson, last name?
Perkins?
Perkins.
Not to be confused with his partner, Jackson Short.
Is everyone ready? Okay. My partner and I negate the resolution the European Union should join the Belt and Road Initiative. Our first contention is Chinese coal. China has squeezed coal companies' profits and led them to turn abroad through the BRI. Hilton finds in 2019 that the BRI could tip the world into catastrophic climate change. Building the Belt and Road Initiative will absorb massive amounts of concrete, steel, and chemicals, creating new environmental oversight in these countries. While China has imposed a cap on coal consumption at home, its coal and energy companies are on a building spree. Overseas, Chinese companies are involved in at least 240 coal projects in 25 of the Belt and Road countries. China's coal plants enjoyed fixed contracts. They saw the best hopes of survival overseas, and the BRI threatens to lock China's partners into the same high-emission development. And Chinese banks are funding coal projects when other banks refuse to because of environmental concerns. Watts finds in 2019 that Chinese banks have become the lenders of coal projects that other international institutions have refused to fund because coal is the primary source of carbon emissions from electricity generation. Companies are expanding overseas, and most of their funding comes from the Belt and Road Initiative. And once countries join coal plants, they will shape other institutions to support dirty energy, locking them into fossil fuels. SEDEC finds in 2019 that carbon emissions are locked in at the contractual stage of investment. Indeed, infrastructure development planning involves long lead times that predetermine technology choices which shape outcomes, including carbon and emission choices for the decades to come. And fossil fuel projects under the BRI are expanding in the status quo and will account for a significant amount of global emissions. SEDEC continues in 2019, showing that investments in countries involved in the BRI would make up as much as 60% of global infrastructure investments over the coming 2 decades. That is, BRI-involved countries could be the single largest source of growing carbon emissions over this critical period. And coal creates air pollution which kills millions every year, as the World Health Organization finds in 2018. An estimated 4.2 million premature deaths globally are linked with ambient air pollution. Locking developing countries into coal for decades could take away our chances of halting global warming before we get to the point of no return. Our second contention is that the Belt and Road Initiative promotes authoritarianism and hurts economies. First, the BRI puts economies at risk, as Bradberg and Sala find in 2018 that the BRI's unaccountable mode of operation when financing and investing regional infrastructure projects through loans risk exposes already vulnerable economies to potentially unsustainable debt levels. A controversial Chinese-built highway in Montenegro has already sent the country's debt soaring. And China views the BRI as a geopolitical tool. Lian finds in 2019 that China sees the initiative as a way to effectively and easily export more of its goods to lucrative markets. At the heart of its concerns is that the BRI is seen as a way for Chinese to spread its geopolitical influence, an acute concern for Europe. And China is looking to push economies over the edge. Holland finds in 2018 that in a study published this month, the CGT identified 14 countries where planned Chinese lending to existing BRI projects threatens to cause financial distress, with seven where it is likely to push local economies to the brink of a debt crisis. And the BRI will give China control over these economies. As Zanelli finds in 2019, there are concerns that this might lead to a new and unsustainable financial situation, adding to the economical and political strings attached to the Chinese economic funding under the BRI. And China is likely to economically coerce these nations to pass policies that are more aligned with their interests. Dundon finds in 2014 that as more states become dependent on China for economic survival, China's ability to influence the international decision-making. And for these reasons, you must negate.
Cool, ready for props?
Yeah. Since you spoke first, you can have the first question.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to stand up here?
Sure. Take it. Alright, go for it.
So is China debt trapping countries now?
Right, so that's what we're seeing, that currently with the BRI, they're trying to debt trap countries. If it continues as you say it will in the negative world, and that's only going to continue.
No.
Or sorry, in the affirmative world.
Why doesn't EU oversight solve that? Like, why doesn't a democratic president even lead to a risk of solving the debt traps.
Right, because we see that China comes in and the EU is not going to have a lot of influence. My partner
Wait.
can continue to rebut your case.
But that doesn't make sense. So
Right.
nothing changes either way. There's debt traps that are happening no matter what way the judge votes.
No, so the debt traps are currently happening, right?
Yeah.
So in your case, you say that the BRI will only continue if you affirm, right?
No, we don't run BRI collapse. We're just saying that they need more funding to create effective projects. And
Right.
I'd say that the reason they're debt trapping in the first place is because they need the profit because they don't have enough money. However, when the
Yeah.
EU begins to be able to fund it, that takes away the incentive to debt trap in the first place.
Alright, we can touch on that rebuttal.
Cool.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so can you explain how biomass is implemented in sub-Saharan Africa?
What do you mean implemented?
Or like how
it's
it's
like
used.
burning wood in
Like
your
how it's
house.
used. Right, and so how are we able to convert those energy systems over to coal? Are we going to come in with power lines and a big coal power plant to convert all the homes to coal energy?
I mean, yeah, like coal
Yeah.
projects will be built, like coal infrastructure.
Right, and so does that mean that we're going to give free energy to all the developing communities in sub-Saharan Africa?
I mean, it's probably not free, but it's definitely not killing you, and I'd say that's better. Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the emissions argument in general. Is the globe warming right now?
Yeah,
Why is coal like the linchpin?
right. You mean specifically for
Yeah,
like
about
the
your
BRI?
case.
Yeah, so when we see that coal comes in, it's actually going to increase the amount of emissions because when coal is available, they're incentivized to burn more.
Wait,
of
so
it.
what has to happen for those emissions to actually have to affect people, right? Is it
Right.
people who are breathing it in, or is it like the emissions going up into the sky and then all of a sudden creating rising temperatures?
Right,
And
right.
then does
so
your
it's that.
impact come out in like natural disasters? Like what's happening here?
Right, right. So we've already seen that like currently, like coal emissions have led to more air pollution. Like let's take countries like China for example. That are
Yeah, I
very
get that it's
industrialized.
creating air pollution, but is it air pollution that is specifically being inhaled by people? Because that's what the Lavelle card specifically isolates, that biomass is going to be a lot
Right.
worse because it's on a smaller scale,
Yeah.
so people are affected more directly by it.
Right, that's on the direct level, but we see like let me give another
Wait, so
example.
yours is
like,
indirect?
No, I mean it's on the smaller scale. Okay? With coal, as we see in developing countries like China, there's big smog like put into the air, which then affects a larger amount of people.
Wait,
in a
I thought
widespread
that you
area.
said that coal wasn't in China right now. I thought you said coal was being outsourced to developing nations.
No, but it has been in the past.
Wait, I'm confused. So what's happening right now?
Yeah, so right now it's trying to be outsourced to developing nations.
Okay.
Caroline, do you need prep time?
Yes. Okay, let me pull up my phone. Okay, starting time now.
I have some judge cheat sheets that I pass out at my tournament. I happen to just have like 5 or 6 in my purse from a tournament we were at this weekend. If anybody wants to look at this, it's got terms and definitions of some of the terms that they're using.
May I have one? I'll scan it
Yeah,
and send
you
it
can.
to everybody.
I've got a Google link too. So like every argument would have an impact. The impact, like if you give a mouse a cookie, he's gonna want milk. If he drinks milk, he's gonna get sleepy. The impact is not that he's gonna, eat a cookie, it's not that he's gonna, want milk, it's that what? If he eats a cookie, he's eventually going to go to sleep, right? So the impact.
All right, 2:05 left.
Would be how they get to the impact. The warrant is like what proves the impact. They're throwing around some terms there just to make sure like everybody gets it.
Okay, and I'm Caroline. For this speech, I'm just going to go down their case and respond to each thing they said. Is everybody ready? Great. Starting off on contention 1, coal. First, remember what we tell you in case fossil fuel dependency is good because the alternative is biomass. As Paley 11 explains that burning biomass instead of fuel oil to heat homes is cheaper. The price of biomass was less than 1/5 the price of fuel oil. If fossil fuel dependency goes away, biomass will easily fill in. We prevent this. And then the PFPI evidence from CASE tells you that biomass emits 150 times the CO2 as coal. That's why Lavelle concludes that 3.5 million people die from biomass use each year. That is the only way where you prevent the widespread usage of harmful biofuel and protect the climate. And then secondly, even if you believe that fossil fuels are bad, they are the only practical method to transition into green technology. As Gary 13 explains, that fossil fuels are the only means to lift people out of energy poverty. What those living in poverty need are reliable, low-cost fuels until we can make the transition into greener energy. And then third, solving for poverty through the BRI outweighs the effects of climate change in 2 ways. First, countries that have more financial capital are able to use that financial capital to innovate and develop green technology that mitigates the effects of climate change. And then secondly, the effects of climate change are more severe on people who are impoverished because they don't have the resources to overcome and adapt to the change. Then on their second contention about Chinese hegemony. First, on debt traps. China isn't trapping BRI nations into debt, as Zhao 19 of Inkstone News writes that in most cases, China renegotiates the debt of countries rather than engaging in things like asset seizure, which has only happened once in over 40 cases. And then secondly, the BRI is not some sort of malicious attempt at Chinese expansionism. As Balding 18 explains, that far from expanding Chinese soft power, the Belt and Road appears to be achieving the opposite. At the point where the BRI hasn't been spreading Chinese hegemony for the last 6 years and is still heavily supported by the Chinese government, it's clear hegemony is not the intent. But third, even if you take them at their highest ground, that China is an evil, malicious actor, this still means that a democratic EU presence in the deal will inevitably lead to better outcomes. As Dasgupta in 2019 explains, that Chinese president has now given clear indication that he is ready to recalibrate the project and the parameters, even if it means losing control over many aspects of the program. This is really important as it means that when the EU joins on to the BRI and has a crucial role in its funding, it's going to be on net more positive for the BRI nations by spreading Western influence as well. And further, we would say that by adding additional oversight and funding to increase the scope and efficiency of the project as a whole, the EU revitalizes the BRI and makes projects more effective. As Bing 19 explains, that EU cooperation makes the BRI more influential. As a leader in rules on investment and trade, Europe has sustainable connectivity. Linking with European strategy will force Chinese companies to improve, ensuring improvements in people's livelihood. In fact, it's more likely that the democratized presence is sustained in a world where the EU can take hold of the project and project their own world views. The act is the only way to solve for both of the impacts in this round, as long as lift 32 million people out of poverty. For these reasons, I urge you to affirm.
Do you all need some prep?
I'm gonna run a little bit of prep.
Okay. Yes.
When they do the crossfire,
Mhm.
is it required that they go up to the podium or wherever they're both standing together, can they stay?
It's not required, but I would prefer it as a judge for them to both stand up next to each other.
Okay.
Okay, y'all have 144 left.
So I'm going to go down on case and respond to their responses, and then I'm going to respond to their case. Is anybody not ready? So starting off on our contention one of lock-in, they have a few responses to this. First is that they keep saying that like they're it's going to increase. They cross-applied their case and keep saying that it's going to increase infrastructure and like increase like innovation and green tech and things like that. but you're gonna see that it doesn't actually increase infrastructure for a few reasons. First, you can look to our second contention that China building this infrastructure is going to put the countries that they're building the infrastructure in a lot of debt, and it's going to make those countries like go into austerity measures and like default on their debt, which is going to decrease their economy and increase the poverty in the country. So you can see they're going to be actually less able to innovate. But then also, Adam Taylor and Noah Barkin, both in 2018, say that a lot of a lot of BRI projects aren't actually used in countries. Like the airport they built in Sri Lanka is now documented as the least used airport in the world. So you're going to see that a lot of these countries projects aren't actually used. So they're pretty much useless. But then also but then moving back to our case, they said on our second condition of raising authoritarianism, they keep saying that they said that they don't have debt traps because they renegotiate with the countries. First of all, that's not true. We read you multiple pieces of evidence how countries have had to go into austerity measures because of Chinese debt, but then also, and more importantly, even if they do renegotiate with China, then you're going to see that they're going to become more dependent on Chinese, they're going to become more dependent on China, which is going to, and we read you a piece of evidence in our case about how China would have control over the economies, and inherently an independent economy is going to be better and more functional than a foreign-run economy. But then also they said that it's going to actually help spread Western influence because of the EU funding it. But you're going to see that's not true because China has never listened to the EU or really any country before, and they're not going to let that override their own wants and needs. But then moving on to their case, I already responded to their infrastructure expansion, but then onto their second point of biomass. They say that biomass is the most used source of energy in Africa, but according to Sturman in 2018, that's actually because by choice. He says that the EU has declared biomass to be carbon neutral. So then those developing countries are actually choosing to use biomass because the EU has declared it to be carbon neutral and not actually bad for the environment. But then also you're going to see that it's actually by choice, so they're not actually going to, But then also they said that it would take 32 million people out of poverty. But you're going to see from that actually the same article that they pulled that piece of evidence from. It says that at this direct quote is at the same time the cost of BRI-related infrastructure could outweigh the gains for some countries. Complementary policy reforms will be essential for countries to unlock BRI-related gains. So you're going to see that a lot of the cost can, according to the same article, the cost will outweigh the benefits. But then moving on to some conclusion and weighing, you're going to see that in the AF world, since they concede to the fact that the BRI is losing funding, then you're going to see that's going to keep happening if the EU doesn't join in, it's going to collapse. So in the NEG world, the BRI is not a thing, and in the AF, the BRI is a thing. So we're arguing that the BRI is very bad because it spreads coal to countries and locks it in, which is going to increase fossil fuel emissions, and hundreds of millions of people die from that every year, and it's going to increase that chance of climate change. You can have the first question.
Great, so is infrastructure increasing or decreasing under the BRI
Right
with
now?
the EU? No, with the EU.
With the EU, so we said that it's even if it does increase, a lot of them aren't going to be
Wait, that's
used.
not the
but then
question.
also-
Is it increasing or decreasing under the EU? Would it in an affirmative world?
And it depends. That's really your ground to cover. We're not going
Wait,
to tell
no,
you. if
because
it's
we
increasing
tell you
or
that is
decreasing.
increasing, but then you tell
Okay.
us in rebuttal that no, it's actually not going to, but then that also means that none of the impacts you outline in your case actually happen. If they don't create infrastructure, then how do you get into this impact about coal usage
Yeah, we're
and
saying- we're
then
not
Chinese
saying
debt
it's not
trapping if none of it's
increasing.
being created in the first place?
Yeah, we're not saying it's not increasing. We're just saying that a lot of the projects aren't actually being used.
You can have a question.
Okay, cool. So you said that like it's going to, that the EU is gonna have like a lot of influence over the BRI,
Yeah.
right? So why would that happen if China has never listened to the EU
Great,
before?
so the Disgupta evidence I read in rebuttal specifically says that the Chinese president has said that if the EU was to join, he would allow them oversight of the project. There's already been like an official statement saying that would happen.
Oh wait, aren't there a lot of official statements that like don't actually happen?
No, I would say this one is definitely going to happen, and you don't give a reason why it wouldn't. Can I have another question?
Yeah.
Cool. So, on the argument about how the developing nations choose biomass by choice, right?
Yep.
Is it a choice if it's all they can afford?
Well, we tell you that the EU said that it's like, or
Does that
yeah.
evidence say that they chose it because of that, or does it just say that's what
Yes,
the
it
EU
does.
said?
Yeah, it does.
So there were no other things going into that decision.
Well, it's like also the cheapest and best for the economies, but then so like there's no reason that.
Wait, it's not, but that's only because they don't have adequate infrastructure to create fossil
Yeah,
fuels
but
in
it's also
developing
because they
nations.
don't think it's bad for the environment.
But is fossil fuel not more efficient than biomass? Is like not burning like fossil fuels better than just cooking wood?
What do you mean?
Is it not more efficient and
So,
creates more energy?
if they're using biomass right now, is it just like not working?
No, it's just the only option they have,
Oh,
and
but
it's
it
leading to
works, right?
3.5 million people dying every year.
If it like works, then why is there a reason for them to?
Because it's not efficient and you can't develop a nation on
No question.
biomass. Yeah.
Alright, so you said that like, right, so on your argument about how it's like innovate, or they increase economies and integrate green tech, right?
Yeah.
You link through that by infrastructure, right?
No, that's basically saying fossil fuel is the only way to actually lead to that. Are you talking about in rebuttal or in case?
In the rebuttal.
In the rebuttal, yeah, fossil fuel is the only way to develop a nation, allow them to have the economic ability to create green tech and invest in it in an
Alright,
effective
but
manner.
wouldn't like fossil fuels be more widespread anyways than biomass? Like,
Not
wouldn't they be
in
burning
developing
more of it?
nations, that's because 90% of developing nations use biomass.
Do you need prep?
Yes.
Okay, 2:05.
Did anybody show or watch CNN 10 today with their classes?
What happened?
They actually talk about the BRI, and they don't call it the BRI. They talk about how Serbia needed infrastructure, so China came in with a big loan to help Serbia out, and it's produced all these jobs for Serbia. They don't talk about the loan. They talk about like, oh, it's all these jobs, and then it talks about the Chinese companies that the materials that are being used in Serbia are Chinese owned and things like that. So it's actually a really good video. And I had no idea it was on. So I'd sent my debaters out in the hall and I was showing it to the rest of my public speaking class. And then I was like, oh, stop. Everybody come back in. You need to watch this. So, I mean, just a simple way to kind of break it down. And to feel like maybe this isn't a topic that feels very current to you, it's actually very current. It just isn't. You may not hear BRI a lot, but it's
What was
relevant.
the terminology they used?
Well, they just talked about Serbia needing China to come in and build infrastructure. So, yeah, so it was building a railway.
54 seconds left.
Okay, so it's gonna be our case, African infrastructure, then their case, coal and debt trust. Is everyone good? Okay. Start at the beginning of the round, where Herrero tells you that the BRI used to be really good and effective until it started to lose funding. That's why the World Bank says that you saw a decrease in African infrastructure by 92.5%. The way the EU joining the Belt and Road Initiative revitalizes that is what Sierton tells you by backing domestic investors. Currently, companies want to invest in Africa because it's going to have 82% of consumption growth over the next decade. They can't until they have legal backing. That's what Sierton isolates. That's how you get to the roads impact that's going to be really, really critical. Satana tells you that once you build a road in a rural community, your chance of getting out of poverty increases by 67%. That's why the World Bank quantifies that once you vote affirmative, 32 million people get pulled out of poverty. But now, let's go on to their case. So first, on their contention one on coal, there's a couple key responses that Caroline gives you in rebuttal. First is that fossil fuels are a prerequisite to transitioning to green tech. That means if their world is completely true, the alternative is just having no energy at all. That's really bad because we'd say that fossil fuels as a prerequisite to green tech is the only way you get to a sustainable climate future in the first place. But then second, remember what she tells you, where we say that financial capital is a prerequisite to innovating green technology and maintaining it in the first place. But then second is that climate change will always be a lot more severe on the poor. That's the Bailey evidence that says that 98% of people who are killed in natural disasters are killed who are in poverty. That's really important, but we'd say just on the impact level, we're winning the round on clarity, because they never tell you where this coal is going, how long it takes for the entire globe to warm. We tell you right when you vote for us, 32 million people get pulled out of poverty. Draw question marks literally all over their side of the flow. All they tell you on infrastructure is that projects aren't used. We'd say that building good projects there and them not being used is a lot better than the alternative, but second is what Searton isolates, that the EU funding specifically is good for making these projects more effective. That's how we get to their contention too on authoritarianism. What Caroline tells you is that a democratic EU presence is the thing that will revitalize the Belt and Road Initiative. And then the second thing is what she tells you is that the reason China has to debt trap countries in the first place is because they don't have a profit. Once EU cash is funneled in, that means that we can not only revitalize the standards for BRI projects, but second is that China doesn't have an intent to debt trap these countries in the first place. But then we'd say we outweigh on poverty no matter what. Because A, once people are lifted out of poverty, they then have the ability to pay taxes to the government and they can get out of debt easier. But then second is that when you have a legitimized BRI, that means that other investors will come in that could have better standards to finance the debt. When you vote for us, 32 million people get pulled out of poverty. That's where you sign your ballot.
144 prep.
Yep. All right.
49 seconds.
Alright, so I'm going to be starting off on their case and then re-explaining ours. Is everyone ready? Okay. So let's start off on their case where they specifically tell you how this African infrastructure is going to pull people out of poverty. We already show you that the BRI projects in the infrastructure is not being used, it's absolutely obsolete, and there's no reason to actually be doing it. They said that this is immediately going to happen, but one, it takes time to build the infrastructure, and second, it takes time for the people to actually use it and be connected with the rest of the world. Second, they talk about biomass. First, biomass is on a really small scale. It's only affecting people within their homes. Where we go on to say with coal, it's actually going to be used in these big power plants, not only in sub-Saharan Africa, which is where they confuse our case. They say that that coal is going to be